With COVID-19 affecting nearly every aspect of our lives, what is it really like to be flying right now? Today we'll answer that question from many different perspectives. From the National Business Aviation Association, this is Flight Plan. I'm Rob Finfrock with your trusted source for business aviation news. Although many parts of the country are still under some travel restrictions due to the COVID-19 pandemic, NBAA continues to be active in working to ensure all U.S. airports remain open and continue to be recognized as part of a federally managed national transportation network. That said, there are conditions that business aviation pilots need to know about for some locations. So how can you determine what conditions may affect your next flight? Today's guest will walk us through the relevant guidance. Alex Gertson is NBAA's Director for Airports and Ground Infrastructure, while Steve Hadley is NBAA's Regional Program Director and the association's Southwest Central Regional Representative. Also with us is Russell Arena, a line pilot for Boston Scientific and Executive Director for the Massachusetts Business Aviation Association, and John Kosak, Project Manager for Weather at NBAA Air Traffic Services. Russ, let's start with you. You're still flying for your company throughout this crisis. How has your flight department adapted to continue flying safely in this environment?
It's been a whirlwind out there right now, and currently I'm flying for Boston Scientific, who is a medical company, and we've been flying around just doing assistant in operations and critical needs at hospitals around the U.S. And honestly, in my 38-year corporate aviation career, I have never seen anything even close to this. But we fly a Challenger 604 and a 605, and what we've been doing to try to cope with this is all our aircraft are actually equipped with N95 masks and antibacterial fluids and liquids and gloves and alcohol wipes, and we wipe the aircraft down every day if we're on an RON, and wipe all the seats, all the counters, wipe everything down with alcohol. And then when the aircraft gets back to home base, it gets a detailed cleaning from our cleaning company from back to front that is not done in the detail that is being done right now. The company is very, very concerned about that, as well as probably other companies that are flying around the country. And the other thing we do is which is pretty unique, is we're keeping our crews in teams just in case someone gets sick. We don't want to cross-contaminate the rest of the flight crews that we have, so we've been staying in teams during this time frame.
I can imagine this is also a very unusual time to be flying into what are normally extremely busy airports.
It's absolutely unbelievable up there. The airports I can think of that I've flown into quite recently and have done for years has been Dulles and San Francisco, and just recently going into Dulles, who were coming in from the south, and they were landing to the south on the 19s, and about 150 miles out, Potomac asked us, because the winds were calm, if we wanted to do a straight into runway 1 right, and we just kind of looked at each other and said, "Wow!" And so we said, "Absolutely." So when we got onto the tower, they cleared us for the approach. It was a severe clear day right into 1 right. And to my amazement, and I mentioned to the other pilot as we were coming in, I said, just look at the airport. We were the only aircraft on the tower control, and looking at the airport itself from the entire spectrum, there was not an aircraft on the ground that was moving, nor were there any aircraft in the air. And it was just very airy. And we got the same results going into San Francisco, and the next day, prior to taking off, we were standing on the ramp by Signature, and I said to the young guy that was with me, and I just said, it was incredibly quiet, and you could hear a pin drop, and there was not an aircraft on the ground moving or anything coming in.
And what's been different while traveling en route, Russ?
Oh, that's pretty interesting in that en route, a lot more direct routing. As soon as you get up, take your clearance and go. Once you get up into the center controllers, you can ask for pretty much anything you want, and the controllers have been fantastic on that. And the interesting note about this is, I think, and John could probably talk into this a little bit more also, is the sectors at the center controllers. I think they're combining a lot of the sectors, so you're with the same controller for a longer period of time than you ever were. And what was interesting is we're hearing a lot, including us, checking in quite frequently with the controllers asking if they're still there because it's just very, very quiet on the frequency. And, we're hearing the airliners do it as well as, some of the corporate airplanes that may be on the frequency for us. But that was a big thing, too. It's just incredibly quiet and staying with the same controller for a longer period of time.
John, from the FAA Command Center, you're seeing a bit of the other side of those conversations.
Yeah, absolutely, Rob. New York Center is probably the best example of that. They were one of the first to have an ATC 0 situation way back at the beginning of this. And since then have come back out, raring and ready to go. But that did mean that they closed down a few of their sectors in order to cover it with the staff that they have. Like Russ and his crews, they're all working in teams so that they don't cross-contaminate. Exactly the same thing that Russ was saying. So it's fantastic to kind of see this running through all the different aspects of the system. And it's definitely true. The overall traffic is down over 75% across the national airspace system. I'm used to being able to pull up our tactical situation display at the command center and see somewhere in the neighborhood of between 5,500 and 7,500 aircraft airborne at any given time. That number is much smaller now, and most of the stuff that's up there is doing what Russ and his crews are doing. They're moving cargo. They're moving important people around, our frontline responders. And thank goodness for those people. But while it's true that in the last few weeks, we haven't seen the use of what we would consider major traffic management initiatives or TMIs like the ground stops, ground delay programs, or airspace flow programs, the potential for delays in the system does exist. Mother Nature has given us several days this spring with large areas of convective weather. Now, during a normal SWAP or severe weather avoidance plan event, the command center and the facilities would be busy trying to figure out how to route large flows of traffic around these areas as safely and efficiently as possible. This usually would result in required routes or at least recommended routes that are put out in advance and gives crews a good idea of what to expect. Except now, like Russ said, they're just pretty much letting them go where they want to go. Now, that still means that getting around thunderstorms, most folks aren't going to want to fly through them. And some of the nasty ones that we've been seeing, definitely not going to try and want to go over these lines. So the centers and TRACONs are giving the crews the ability to pretty much do whatever they want to get around these storms, deviate as necessary for safety and comfort of flight. But that means that they have to give more space between these flights, extra miles in trail, as it were. And it's possible that these sorts of things can create some delays. Also, if the thunderstorms happen to beat you to your destination, again, we don't have enough volume to generate a ground stop, but holding en route or at or near the destination is not unheard of either. So it's just different. Everything's being handled tactically right now.
Steve, in addition to the operational considerations that John and Russ mentioned, another interesting factor in this situation is that crews flying across state lines may face different restrictions on travel and even mandatory quarantines once they're on the ground. What advice do you have for operators as they're planning these trips?
Well, first, they need to be aware that the implementation of government restrictions are very fluid and they can change on very short notice. Also, actual local enforcement can vary between locations and even within a state. For that reason, I always tell them it's imperative to check with the facility at their destination for the current local conditions before launching. Second, these restrictions can impact a crew and their workload, the impact to the crew and the passenger schedulings, as well as activities on the ground. And there was always the threat of possible self-quarantining, which would affect the value of the flight. The last thing that anyone wants is for a crew or their principals on the plane to be stuck quarantined in a state, although several of these states have implemented a temporary, you're only quarantined while you're in the state. So that is given some relief from the 14-day self-quarantine. So it's all very much a timely thing, which is why the regional reps have been involved so much, because we are more aware of what is actually happening on the ground as compared as what's on a website, a map, or listing of state restrictions.
Russ, you mentioned the eerie experiences you've had flying into some what are normally extremely busy airports. What other differences have you noticed as you're pulling up to FBOs, and how have those facilities and your own crews adapted their procedures to this environment?
Well, first of all, I tell everyone to, as we do, check with the FBOs just because they're changing their hours of operation, and they'll have some off hours, either opening later or closing earlier. Although they've been very accommodating, if you call them, they will do whatever they need to do to make sure they're there for you, for your arrival or your departure. Just recently, we've noticed more and more line service has masks on. They're being very distant from us. CSRs have always been good. They've been keeping their, having masks on at the FBOs. And like supermarkets, the FBOs have been putting up these plexiglass shields in front of on the counter, which has been working out, very, very well. So I would just make sure that you check in with your FBOs and making sure that they're available and have all the accommodations that you need. And we've actually been taking more rental cars than anything else and trying to stay away from the ride shares or taxis for the most part.
Alex, what are you hearing from the airport directors and managers handling this crisis? And are you aware of any airports that have shut down their operations?
There have been a number of airports that have, by the order of their municipality, either whether the direction is coming from the state governor or from the mayor, looked into shutting down. However, they are part of the national airspace system, and each airport plays an important role as a node in that system. And it's all preempted by the federal government. So the local authorities do not have that jurisdiction for federally obligated airports that have taken federal funding. Ultimately, the FAA has done a great job standing its ground and working with these airports and the local elected officials and state officials to communicate that to them. And to our knowledge, for the moment, all airports remain operational and ready to receive traffic. There is one airport in Colorado, which is not federally obligated and does not have instrument approaches. That mayor has been able to restrict it to essential and emergency traffic only. They do have an air ambulance that's based out of there. And originally, when the mayor tried to completely shut down the airport, he realized that it would really hurt the community and the surrounding areas that this medical operator serves. Users that are flying to Puerto Rico should also check. They have special health-related procedures. All airports in Puerto Rico are open, but only 3 remain available for entry from the mainland. And then once you clear all the health inspections, then operators can proceed to any of the other general aviation airports. I also wanted to emphasize that airports are open and operational. The airport staff are working very hard to protect themselves. A lot of them have done similar to what Russ has described as having an A shift and a B shift that are alternating days to make sure that they have expertise such as electricians and ops professionals staggering their shifts. Should anybody get sick on one shift, other shift can pick up the work. The pavement will survive the pandemic, but it really takes the hardworking people with their talents and expertise at airports to keep them going. And while there might not be much traffic now, once we rebound, airports have to be ready to staff up and to service that traffic, and now to continue to operate the airport safely. Once you walk off the airplane and walk out of the terminal, now you have to be aware of some of the local restrictions that might be happening. In relation to the hotspots, that is a big no-no. Airports cannot restrict traffic from the hotspots, and FAA has particular guidance that they've put out on that. So I would very much make all of our operators aware that if they're hearing something from an airport that they cannot come in because they're coming from an area that's considered a hotspot, or see a NOTAM to that effect, to alert us immediately, and we'll work with the FAA to resolve that.
John, what questions are you receiving at NBAA Air Traffic Services from members in terms of their flight planning and any unique aspects with operating right now?
Right now, most of the stuff that we're getting less to do with route planning because of what Russ was talking about earlier, but more curiosity about what airports are open and closed. And that goes to the ATC 0 discussion. So real quick, just a refresher on that. ATC 0, if they have to evacuate or clear out a facility because of the COVID or any other thing that's going on right now. We had an emergency in Phoenix where there was a fire alarm pulled, also resulted in ATC 0. So that just means that we're operating with less staff than normal. ATC services are not being provided by the normal, whether it's the tower, the TRACON, or the center. The airspace is usually being absorbed by somebody else. The FAA has done a fantastic job of minimizing the COVID closures, with most of those occurring overnight when they're having the least impact on an already very stable system at this point. Back to the pavement thing what Alex mentioned, White Plains is actually using this time to get a lot of work done on their surfaces, so that they will be one of those airports that is, right up and rare and ready to go when this thing is over, with nice new pavement for Russ and other crews to land on. But I want to go back to something that Russ said is the probably the two most important pieces of information that we can give out right now are check NOTAMs prior to every single flight. I know that you're always doing that, but I can't stress how important that is right now, mostly from an airport closure. If we have the ATC 0 situations, or somewhere like White Plains right now, which is being closed for construction to everything but fixed wing aircraft, not rotary wing. And the second thing is, like Russ said, call the FBOs. Make sure that the services you need are going to be available.
Russ, this pandemic has also had a drastic effect on hotels and restaurants, often frequented by overnighting flight crews. Some of those facilities have even closed down. What guidance does your operation provide to pilots and crew members to adapt for that?
Yeah, it's been pretty interesting because what I see happening is a lot of the hotels, as you said, are having a lot of closures, and not only closures, but dealing with food. At the beginning, it was really not a huge problem, but it's becoming more and more. Example one has been completely closed down, minimal capacity, and as far as the food issue, at the beginning of this thing, you service a couple of the restaurants at the hotels were open, but as of like today, I would say the hotels that we've have been closed for the food, and pretty much no room service. So we've been actually had to fend for ourselves, and that puts actually an extra strain on an area we haven't talked about, which is the dispatch in the schedulers. They're no longer available, and so we're having to look around the airport. What's available? What do they have for services? And that's become an issue. And with that said, we've actually been taking some food with us, non-perishable stuff, as an emergency. And while we're at the hotels, when we get to the room, wiping down the knobs, wiping down the remote controls on the TVs, and pretty much staying in our room because there's really nothing to do. None of the lounges are open. We'll call and do like Uber Eats and have something delivered, and or stop at a grocery store and pick up some food to get through this.
And what are you hearing about this situation from your members at the Massachusetts Business Aviation Association?
A few of the companies are still doing minimal flying at best to support their entities. And then some of the flight departments are just going up, doing some flying, and just to maintain currencies, and doing some holding and doing their takeoff and landings. And Some of the flight departments are actually the maintenance techs are taking the airplanes out to run them on the ramp just to exercise them because, as we know, airplanes don't like to sit on the ground. But basically, the majority of them are just staying down in place and doing what they need to do. And some of the flight departments are actually catching up on some training, doing projects they weren't able to do before. And just, I think all the flight departments are just wanting to make sure they're ready to go when this thing breaks and they'll be able to get back to their job.
Steve, what have you and your team of regional representatives seen flight departments doing during this situation so they may continue to be mission ready even if they may not be flying as often?
Well, the preparation for a flight about what restrictive regulations are in place for the destinations and a return to their home base may actually begin days before a flight. The flight departments are being prepared by using appropriate PPE equipment depending on company guidelines, state and local guidelines, and the risk associated with the destination location, including the time spent and exposure while on location. Additional briefings to passengers of what to expect upon arrival should be done early in the trip planning process by dispatch or the pilots, depending on flight department size. Our experience with the reps early on was that passengers were not always aware of the conditions they would be exposed to while conducting business in some locations. And once they became aware through the different means of checking with local facilities, other information, they decided to make other plans or delay their trip. Disinfection, as Russ mentioned, of the aircraft before and after flights, personal hygiene when working with FBO personnel, and just using common sense is important to both the crew and those interacting with you at the destination. I have to do a shout out to the staff at the FBOs. They are on the front line. They are receiving people not only domestically but internationally, and in some cases they really don't know what they're being exposed to. So I applaud the fact that they're out there doing their jobs during this pandemic.
So Alex, as we look toward our industry hopefully rebounding in the near future, and as operations begin to return to what will pass for the new normal, as it were, what challenges do you expect we might see at the airport level?
I mentioned the concern about staffing. I think that's going to be the primary challenge for airports, both from the health perspective. If somebody gets sick, potentially that entire shift may have to quarantine. But also from the financial perspective, a lot of the airports have revenues that have completely dried up during the crisis. And depending how long it lasts, they're struggling to keep their talented and well-trained professionals there. Potentially, if staffing drops below certain levels, they may not be able to be open 24 hours a day with the same level of inspections and safety. So I would advise our operators to be on the lookout for that. Also, all of the participants have mentioned to be aware of local specificities with health-related restrictions. I think that's going to be prevalent as we start flying as well. I was talking with a airport staff in Florida, at an airport in the Florida Keys this morning, and he had to interrupt our conversation because an aircraft flew in, and in the Keys, they're responsible for checking the occupants and taking their temperature as they let them in. That's not necessarily the case at other areas in the same state in Florida. Some airports are distributing cards and it's just for information to passengers and crews. Others are taking serious actions. So we need to be aware that the airports are going to be tasked to do a number of things and be prepared with each stop, not just think that if I've been to a Florida airport before, I know what's going on in Florida. Make sure you research each stop for each trip to be aware of what's happening there and get the information as current as you can for your time of arrival or departure.
And John, what issues do you anticipate we might see in the national airspace system? And might general aviation and business aviation operations perhaps return at a faster rate than other segments?
In over 12 years at the command center and 20 years in aviation now, I've never seen anything like this. So this is a best guess based on, recovery from hurricanes and other things in the past. But if I had to take a guess, I'd say we're going to see the traffic management initiatives, the major ones like stops, ground delay programs, airspace flow programs, come back a little earlier than what we might normally expect. That might be due to a couple of things. We might still be fighting staffing issues with the FAA, as they may still be working in the triple crews in order to keep their crews from cross-contaminating each other until we're absolutely sure that this virus has been eradicated or has been moved out. So staffing may be an issue for quite a while going forward at FAA facilities. I don't know if necessarily general aviation will bounce back faster than the airlines, but BizAv has always seemed to be heavily involved in the recovery and rebuild portion of major events like earthquakes and hurricanes. So it wouldn't surprise me, just because of the inherent flexibility and drive of business aviation, to see us leading the way.
NBAA has made available a tremendous amount of information pertaining to the COVID-19 pandemic at nbaa.org/coronavirus. You should also check out NBAA's thrice weekly webinar series at nbaa.org/news-hour with a variety of topics of importance to members. The April 17th episode, in particular, addresses operational challenges with our nation's airports. For the latest information regarding operations in the NAS, check out nbaa.org/ATS. And to learn more about Russ's organization, the Massachusetts Business Aviation Association, visit www.massbizav.org. And that's the latest from the National Business Aviation Association. Remember, you can subscribe to all Flight Plan episodes at Apple Podcasts in the App Store, wherever you find your favorite podcasts, or download them from nbaa.org. I'm Rob Finfrock, and thanks for listening to Flight Plan.